All right, James, we are really, really live now, and I'm glad that I can hear your voice.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for making time and being flexible.
Absolutely. So I said in the previous space that I think this is a really important time for Climate X. Just looking at the news you put out on August 11th, you sort of laid out the milestones and plans for Q3 and Q4. And October seems to be a month where there's going to be a site visit in West Africa at the reforestation project by the pre-purchaser of the carbon credit. So before we get into that and the company details, which I really want to get into, let's just go high level
Sure,
to start the conversation and tell us about Climate X and who you are and why you chose to take this role as CEO of the company.
sure. Happy to do that. So I've been in the carbon space since about 2008. I was the founder of a previous company that was focused on Canadian projects that built out the Great Bear Rainforest in British Columbia, which is 6 million hectares. The Maindombe project in Democratic Republic of Congo, and we were one of the early movers in that space, and then shifted to focus on North America and Canada. Made the Olympics carbon neutral in 2010. Made the province of British Columbia carbon neutral over about 8 years as well. So I'm a kind of one of the veterans in this space, and we put this company together for two reasons. Firstly, the wall of demand that's coming from companies making net zero commitments, 4,000 companies around the world representing 30% of global market capitalization, need to hit net zero, and the only way they can do that is buying carbon credits. So we saw a huge opportunity there, and then we also saw that the way that the sector was organized was still very much kind of artisanal, small-scale project development. And I figured what we needed to do was build a company that looked a lot more like a resource sector company that negotiates large-scale concessions with governments, gets the rights to the land and subsurface rights and surface rights in place in advance, and then develops pre-purchase and offtake agreements exactly the way that the oil and gas sector creates agreements for LNG plants. So we secured land in Sierra Leone, where we've been operating for 20 years with our team, Yucatan in Mexico, Suriname, and Guyana. And that gave us a kind of toehold into the market, to then go and speak to the largest buyers. So we went to the largest buyers and said, look, you can have these credits if you purchase them on a pre-purchase basis, give us a firm price and offtake. And we had 16 different companies in the bidding process for that. And the winning company, which is a Fortune 100 company from Europe, the winning company pays the balance of the capex on the project. So that means that all of the native species replanting we're doing in the country in Sierra Leone is going to be paid for by the buyer, and we pay them back with credits as those credits are delivered. The scale will probably make us one of the largest tree planters in Africa, if not the largest. So we've got about 100,000 hectares of forest area we can replant. We've got up to 30,000 hectares of mangrove we can protect and plant in West Africa. And basically, as these trees grow or as they're conserved, every year they throw off carbon credits, which we validate and then monetize and sell to the market. And so it's been a really interesting ride and very, very rapid progress from a listing just over a year ago to where we're at now, which is a pipeline of 43 million tons worth something like $2 billion over their lifespan.
$2 billion over their lifespan. Okay, that's a big number. I'm pretty new to carbon credits, and I don't think the carbon credits market, the space, is well understood. I mean, I hear Bill Gates talking about how he offsets his private jet flights around the world with the platinum or gold standard in carbon credits.
Yeah.
What is he talking about, and how does he acquire those, and who does he acquire those carbon credits from?
Yeah, so we're an owner operator, a project developer. So we go out, secure the projects. We could do the same thing with technology projects if we were reducing emissions, let's say from switching diesel trucks to electric. Anything where you spend money and you can reduce emissions and then show that you own the rights to those, you can generate carbon credits. There's different places you can buy them. There's retail organizations and companies that will sell them directly to you. There's exchanges. There's CIX exchange in Singapore. There's a number of other exchanges that can set up where you can just rock up and buy, 1 credit or 1 million credits. Our approach has been more wholesale. So we tend to sign contracts for hundreds of thousands to millions of tons directly to large corporates. We also work with some of the commodity traders, so the Macquaries and Mercuries of the world, Hartree, Glencore, who are building big books of carbon credits. So we're really a wholesale producer. We like signing contracts for millions of tons at a time. But for someone like Bill Gates, if he doesn't have his own projects, then he would buy those through one of the many websites that resells carbon credits to retail people.
So there are websites that acquire carbon credits from wholesalers and then resell them to private individuals and corporations.
Yeah, there's probably hundreds now of different places where you can use a calculator, go in and calculate your emissions, and then offset them. We have companies in Canada like Mogo that has a carbon neutral credit and debit card. So every dollar you spend, they retire a pound of carbon credits on your behalf. It gets embedded in airplane tickets. It gets embedded in carbon range of different ways that the consumers can buy credits to offset their emissions. When you're dealing with large corporates, they kind of want to buy in bulk and they want to get a discount, and they want in some cases to buy out the entire project. So it's a little bit different when you have that kind of scale to it.
I read a research report from Citi last month that, it was pretty good, but it seemed like they're trying to, figure out the space and where it's, heading as well. I saw some number how the total global market for carbon credits is somewhere around 10 billion now, or it will be by the end of this year, and it's heading towards 50 billion. Do you see that as being fairly accurate, or do you think that they're being optimistic
No, I think that range is about right. Basically, the reason we have high confidence about this, Mark Carney's group put together a huge report just over a year ago, and they said, look at all the companies that have made net zero commitments, and if you made a net zero company or a public company now, then you're in the crosshairs of the regulator, because you can't say you're going carbon neutral or net zero and not do anything about it. So those companies now all have to buy carbon credits and do something about their commitments. And basically, they worked out that if you look at all the demand that's going to come from those companies, so 4,000 companies, 30% of global market capitalization of all public companies, under the Banking Alliance to Carbon Neutrality, $67 trillion of assets under management have made commitments to net zero. So those numbers are realistic in the context of the kind of scale of business operations we're talking about. The constraint is how quickly companies like us can ramp up production of credits. It's not the demand in this case, it's how quickly credits can come to market. And we've been one of the fastest moving companies. We've expanded our reach very, very quickly. And, the buyers are so desperate for product, the market is so short, they'll effectively sign a pre-purchase to buy the next 20 or 30 years of credits from a specific project, just to know that they have certainty around pricing and ownership. So, the numbers range from 20 to 50 billion, 30 billion by 2030 was what Mark Carney said. Shell and Boston Consulting Group said it was probably closer to 20 billion. But the 20 to 30 year time frame, there's very, very rapid growth in this market. And for a company like ours, we're kind of like a junior mining or exploration company. We build up these projects, and ultimately we can pre-sell all the production from those on very, very favorable terms. We don't even need project finance in many cases. They'll prepay for the rights to the projects, and we use that capital to do all the tree planting or all the mangrove protection.
Okay, that makes sense, and it sounds pretty good. So let's use an actual example. So you put out a couple of news items in August. One of which was that you planted 400, hectares in West Africa
Yeah.
as part of a pre-purchase agreement, which I think is with this Fortune 100 company. So, can you tell us about the process of planting that land, where it is planted, how it is validated by a third party,
Yeah.
and then how the carbon is actually sold?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So Sierra Leone's really interesting in Africa because it's got very strong private land rights. So smallholders, the people and farmers that own land, have very, very strong rights in the constitution. So we basically travel around the region. We identify areas where the chiefs have given us permission to develop projects, and we sign a 30-year lease agreement with a farmer. The farmer gets paid a guaranteed lease fee for land that they get zero income from right now, and then we also hire them often to do the tree planting work. The way we do that is we go into the forest, have them gather seeds in the forest, put them in a nursery for for a year, and then a year later we can plant them out on the land. So we hire people, have up to 2,000 people working for us, clearing the scrub, digging holes, and putting trees in them. And then we have a team that monitors them. And it sounds expensive, but in a country where the average salary is $1 a day, it's one of the reasons we're in these African jurisdictions, because the cost of doing business is much lower there from that perspective. So once the trees are planted, each year we come back with an audit team, and they look at how fast the trees are growing. They can estimate from that how much carbon is being sequestered. And then each year we issue another vintage of carbon credits. And they're registered on Vera, which is the transparent registry. And a company can make sure they haven't been pre-sold to anybody else. There's a very sort of tightly controlled system for managing how these credits are produced and sold.
Okay, got it. Now, just my investor mind starts going to where things could go wrong. How can things go wrong here? What if there's a fire, like a forest fire, that shreds the whole area?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing is we're working in tropical countries around the world, which have very, very fast growth rates. They go 3 times faster than trees in the US and Canada, and they tend to be very wet. And when we're planting during the rainy season, and they're getting probably 2 meters of rain during the rainy season. So moist tropical forests don't have a huge fire risk in the way that we've seen fires in Canada and the US this year. But we also we have a monitoring service. We have a fire service. We use satellites to monitor soil moisture and make sure the trees are growing well. It's because these are patches of land across the whole area, at least initially. If there was a fire or some damage in one area and some flooding, it doesn't affect the whole project area. And we also, make sure we have enough trees to replant any that get damaged. So it's not without risk, but our team has planted 10,000 hectares in the past, and I wouldn't say we haven't lost a tree, but we haven't lost a tree area. The other type of project we do is a conservation project. So we're looking on the coast of Sierra Leone at mangrove areas that are at threat of being cut down. And what we do is pay local people more money than they would get from cutting the trees down to protect those areas, and we hire them. And the productivity from those mangrove areas, when you conserve them, could be 500 to 1,000 tons per hectare. So very, very good from a revenue perspective for us, because we get a big bump of cash at the beginning, but also very good from the locals' perspective, because they make money from not destroying the forest areas.
So on August 11th, you put out the roadmap for Q3 and Q4,
Yeah.
and the second point, well, the first and second and third point, actually, I think like almost all the points there, 1 through 7, are about the pre-purchase agreement with the Fortune 100 company and the planting work that has been underway and will be complete by late October. So can you give us an update on that project, where it's at, and the visit from the Fortune 100 buyer?
Yeah, so we've now planted almost 700,000 trees, close to 800 hectares completed, and we'll finish the rest within the next couple of weeks. And that's gone very well. So the planting out's been very successful. We have a site visit planned in early October, where the buyer is coming to do the site inspection. We also have some milestones coming up, which we've now met. So the second disbursement of prepayment will happen, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And so we receive a further $500,000 US towards that project. We've also secured the land ownership agreements and rights to about 15,000 hectares within the total of 100,000 that we're looking at. We've also finished for the mangrove project the draft, basically the reserve statement, the project design document for the mangrove areas. We've also finished one in Suriname, and then we're in the process of launching a new technology platform, which allows you to kind of trace your ton of carbon all the way back to the original tree that was planted using satellite data and ground-based truthing. So people have that real sense of kind of control and ownership over the projects. So in terms of the milestones I laid out in that roadmap, we're on track or ahead of progress on all of those.
Okay, and so the way it works is you sign an agreement with the buyer, and the payment is made in tranches when certain goals are met. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So we've signed an agreement with them that they'll pay the remaining $2.5 million US to complete the planting out of the project. We have another milestone at the end of December, and then 2 more next year, so a total of $2.5 million. And they do the site inspections, they look at the reports, and they ultimately, if they're happy with those, they send us a check on a kind of milestones and progress basis. After the site visit, we're expecting they have an option to upgrade from 5,000 to 25,000 hectares. I don't see any reason they wouldn't pull the trigger on that, and that takes the project up from increases it 5-fold. So revenues over the lifespan of the project of something like $465 million over the 20-year lifespan of the project. So it's a big deal for us, the October visit, and we're very excited about it. And we don't think we're going to have any problems with it.
Okay, great. And then I assume that the company will put out news when it's appropriate following the site visit.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a very busy fall coming up with lots of releases scheduled and some really exciting advances. So it's going to be a busy time through the fall.
And this project is just one of many that you have. Can you give us an example of another project that you're working on, and maybe some actual examples of how this process of replanting and reforestation is helping people in their daily lives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the social benefit and economic benefit in places like Sierra Leone of this kind of planting is huge, because really people live off the land and subsistence and have no other sources of income. So the government likes this because the economic benefits are huge. When you look at mangroves, the protection of coastlines from sea level rise also makes a huge difference. So protecting areas that will stop flooding is important. So in Yucatan, in Mexico, we have a project with signed by the governor of the state of Yucatan to restore about 30,000 hectares within 100,000 hectares of mangrove that's been destroyed because of roads built along the coastline. So we think we can get that fully restored, and that has huge benefits for biodiversity. It's a big issue for the Yucatan government that wants to be a leader on these kinds of issues. And then we have a release coming out very soon around the launch of our project in Suriname. And the Suriname project is also about restoring mangroves on the coastline, protecting areas of farmland, but also generating very significant revenues from that restoration work. So, we're not, we're an ESG company, we're an impact company. We think that's important. We also think we need to make really good returns for investors. What we also recognize is if we take care of local partners and they have a profit share and a benefit in this, they're much more likely to play along and be strong participants and partners in the project. So sometimes it looks like we're being a little bit altruistic, but actually, if you don't find ways of giving people alternatives to cutting down mangroves, they have no choice. So effectively, if we can compensate them for not doing that and provide them with jobs, it's one of the key ways of stopping the destruction of these areas. And I always remind people, like, 20% of global emissions come from deforestation and land degradation. That's far bigger than aviation or the cement industry. And so what we're doing is using the markets to fund these things, and generating returns in the typically in the 18 to 25% IRR range. For our conservation projects, we have IRRs in the 80 to 90% range. So we're able to do all these good things, but also have a very profitable company alongside that.
Yeah, and that's great that you mentioned that, because I was going to ask about the IRR, and then, I mean, how scalable is this? I mean, if somebody came to you and said, "Here's $10 million, James, what can you do with it?" I mean, how scalable is this model?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our typical capex on a project, like take the Sierra Leone one for instance, we spent $2 million getting the project through the technical process and securing land rights. We've secured another $2.5 million of pre-purchase. Once that's invested, the project will generate $110 million of revenues over the lifespan. We're looking over time at getting access to much more capital. It's incredibly scalable in places like Sierra Leone and in Suriname, where the whole coastline is at risk. So our job is to use our equity very carefully, to de-risk the projects as a developer and owner. And then the multiples that we get, think about 2 million spent in Sierra Leone to get $110 million of revenue through the company. The leverage in our equity is incredible. How much more could we do? I mean, if we have the right market support, which is what we're working on with our buyers and partners, we could be deploying $50 to $100 million into project development. And as I said at the beginning, like, scaling up to become the largest conservation and tree planting company in Africa. Once you planted trees in one part of Sierra Leone or restored one area of mangrove in Yucatan, you can prove that out and then expand it from 30,000 to hundreds of thousands of hectares. It's pretty modular. And we're not seeing any decline in the demand from the large buyers. I mean, the oil and gas companies, the two biggest ones have $500 million allocated to project development. The biggest commodity traders have $400 to $500 million allocated just for these upfront costs. So I think we're going to see a massive uptick in this market, and we're one of the few, if not the only, really publicly listed owner and operator now. The streaming and royalty companies are out there, but they rely on owner operators to build the project. So we think we have a very scalable model, and when the markets start to strengthen, we'll be able to show that kind of growth and return.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't seen an example of carbon credits in my life until yesterday. I purchased an airline ticket from the German national airline, and at the end of the process, as I was paying, they asked me which package I would like to offset my my carbon emissions from the
Right.
flight,
Yeah.
and it was like, I don't know, 35 euros I spent. And that's the first time I've done that in my entire life.
Yeah.
So clearly there is some traction here. And, so for a big company like that, like American Airlines or what have you, where are they going to get their carbon offsets?
To people like us, basically. I mean, the two ways you can get to carbon neutrality is you can be a good citizen like you were yesterday and buy the carbon credits. All the oil and gas and aviation companies are offsetting their own emissions, and the big, by being big corporate buyers, they take care of the problem for you. I would guess American Airlines is probably investing in US projects, because the US market tends to be a bit more uh, uh, domestically focused, I would guess, is probably the best way of saying it. But some of the big airlines like British Airways have been doing international credits. The oil and gas companies, Chevron, Total, BP, and Shell, are all buying internationally. And you'll start seeing more and more labeling for carbon neutrality or net zero. You see companies, I think when the companies made these commitments to go net zero, the CEOs didn't understand how big an undertaking that was. And then the SEC and the EU said, look, if you told investors that your company is net zero, you have to show you're doing something about it. You can't just say it like it's greenwashing. You actually, you're actually required to follow up and show what your working plan is. So I just think it's going to become totally normalized, and it's a bit like paying a fuel surcharge or a bit like paying travel insurance. It's just the cost of doing business increasingly for these companies.
So I want to open the floor to people who have questions here for a few minutes, but I mean, I guess I have two more. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand to speak, and I'll call on you. Um, I guess I have two more questions, and then we'll see what the audience has. First question is, I know there's a second tranche of a financing set to close soon. Can you give us an update on that? And then my second question is, when do you think you will be able to officially announce the Fortune 100 company, like who they are?
Yeah, I mean, the only delay on closing the second tranche has been that the management team are participating in the financing. So we're all participating in the private placement, and we've just been waiting for exchange approval for our participation. So I think we may even get that today. We've got a couple of sort of stragglers and investors who'll come in as well. But we set out to raise $1 million in this private placement, just to give us the room to expand our growth in the next couple of months, and we were able to hit that in what's been a pretty challenging market. I think if we're all honest about this, it's a hard time to raise money, so we're happy to hit that.
I think challenging is an understatement, James.
Yeah, maybe. Well, British understatement.
It's a really tough market, really, really tough.
Yeah, so I was very pleased that even given the time of year, we're able to attract that kind of new capital. In terms of the announcement of the Fortune 100 company, I think it'll be in Q3, Q4. They want to do their site visit. They want to make sure they get the story right. They're not embarrassed about it or hiding it or anything. It's just a big company, and they're slow to move on publicity. So they want to make sure they have the best possible support in the market when this goes live. So it will happen. It will happen pretty soon, and we're all excited about the kind of coverage we're going to get from doing that. And we continue to talk to them about our projects. We continue to talk to a number of other partners and buyers about some of our other projects.
Okay, I'm going to call on Lavrion if you still have a question. But I guess I have one more, and I'm going to throw that out there before I forget. So you think that all these companies who have advertised net zero, and there's a lot of them, there's hundreds of them, you think they're going to be like their feet are going to be put to the fire by the SEC and those regulators, and they're going to have they're going to come in with bids in this market like in the next, I don't know, 3-4 months?
Well, we had 16 different groups bidding on our first project, which was just 5,000 hectares. So huge amount of activity and interest. We thought the traders might give us the best prices, but actually in the end it was one of the large corporates that did it. So they're already active. They're kind of getting increasingly desperate to find scalable projects. The SEC and EU are already moving on challenging the kind of green credentials of companies. Deutsche Bank was fined last year for overstating the green composition of one of its bond issuances. So it's already happening. And then you've got stakeholder groups and NGOs watching, the action of every major oil and gas company. So there's protests every day in London against the oil and gas sector, and driving them to be more responsible. So this stuff is already happening. I just think it gets lost in the news. And the other interesting thing that happened because of the increase in oil prices was all those companies made record profits, and their pension fund shareholders and major shareholders are all saying, we want you to take some of these record profits from high oil prices and be responsible, do the right thing in terms of your carbon profile. So while everything else has been going wrong in a kind of paradoxical way, the demand for credits has never been stronger. In the 15 years I've been in this space, I've never seen so much interest and demand in projects.
And it's kind of interesting because I'm an extractive industry guy. I'm a mining guy, and my brother, is an engineer for Chevron. So we cut our teeth in extractive industries. But even being pro mining and pro oil and gas, I can see carbon credits are absolutely needed, and this is a high growth sector. And I don't think you're one or the other. I think that you can be, you can see the need. We need more fossil fuels to get us to where we're going in 10, 20, 30 years. And we also need to be responsible and take care of the environment and not encourage more global warming. And maybe I said some controversial things there, but this is
No,
my opinion.
No, I think people try and make it too binary, and it's like either you cut all your emissions or you do carbon credits. Like there's no world in which we can just switch off all emissions in 6 months and suddenly become a kind of zero carbon economy. It's infrastructure that's taken 200 years to build up since the Industrial Revolution. We've had massive transitions in electricity generation, in solar and in wind in the last 10 to 15 years. It's now the cheapest way to generate power is through solar. But the whole system, you're turning over a massive amount of infrastructure in the energy sector, and you can't do that overnight. So we see credits as being a transition mechanism, which says, while you're trying to figure out how to reduce your emissions across the board as much as you can, this is a way of kind of accelerating climate change.
All right, great. So Lavrion, if you're still there, I just activated your speaker link. If you have a question for James, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just building off the tail end of that conversation that you guys had. Someone mentioned recently that companies will be held accountable to what they claim they'll be able to get in terms of net zero carbon emissions. I was just wondering, have you recently heard about the whole management change within Fortescue? They're an Australian iron ore or iron mining company. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on how people have kind of gone in and out of that company recently with regards to that?
Yeah, I don't know much about that particular company at all, unfortunately. So I probably can't comment much on that.
No worries. And I guess my second part of the question is, just like the host, um, I'm a mining guy myself, and I can't help but notice permitting in, I guess I would say, the Western world is taking increasingly longer to get these mines approved. And I was wondering if there was a better way to convince stakeholders about how the either closure or reclamation of these mines could speed up or expedite that process. Again, another thing that caught my eye was Rio Tinto in Northern Australia. Um, they just recently found out that their closure slash reclamation costs have doubled since their initial, I guess, report from
Yeah,
something about 1.3 billion Aussie dollars to 2.4 or something like that.
yeah. I mean, I think there's permitting challenges in all developed markets, particularly where there's an indigenous component. What we found in developing countries is, even in places like Mexico now, the expectation around kind of community consent and engagement is much higher than it used to be. So we spend a lot of time getting those consents in place. All of these resource companies, the problem seems to be less about technical problems of the projects and more about kind of failing to get consents and engagement from the communities. That can kill a project. There was a nationalization of a project in Mexico last year. The permitting was rescinded. So, you got to all companies, including ours, including mining companies, have to make sure that all the different stakeholders are on board before they can move forwards.
In your experience, how quickly does that nationalization process happen? Is it literally at the drop of a hat? A country will be like, hey, you know what? We got a good thing going for us, so we're going to take this back?
No, I don't think it does. I think it's still pretty unusual. In the Mexico case, there were concessions granted that weren't properly and legally granted. In general, that government doesn't want to be running and operating mining resources because they don't have the capital to do it. And in the project areas we work in carbon, there's no way a government on its own has the technical ability to develop these. And most of the big buyers don't want to buy direct from government. They want to buy from a private operator. So we just make sure our revenue sharing, benefit sharing is very strong so that everyone gets a fair slice of the pie. And that, the project I set up in the Congo in 2012 has never had any issues with reversals. It's always been very well managed.
All right. Thanks for the questions, Lavrion. I appreciate that.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope that you received some value from this video. Please stay tuned to goldfinger.capital for updates and new videos. Have a powerful day.